My name is Melissa Parks. I am Slate's Director of Enterprise Client Partnerships, and I could not be more excited to be here today with this group. You all are doing hard work in your organizations, and you are transforming the workplace. I have a young daughter, and she has a dream of being a scientist. And it is incredible to me to think that the work that you are all doing today is shaping the future workplace that my daughter, an aspiring female scientist, could one day join. I truly cannot thank you all enough for the time, the energy, and the dedication that you pour into creating organizations that are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Now, for those of you who perhaps signed up for the webinar but aren't familiar with Slate, we are a scalable leadership and career coaching firm that is passionate about bringing the power of executive coaching beyond the C-suite. The goal of our coaching engagements is to drive breakthrough growth in the flow of work. Our clients tend to partner with us to support initiatives around succession planning and hypo development, up-leveling of skills, and of course, what we're going to be discussing today, DEIB strategy. We do have a few housekeeping items to cover. So first, as you see, there are multiple faces on this screen, and it was done by design. We want you all to feel included. We encourage you to keep your cameras on. However, if you would prefer to view the speaker more prominently, you are able to change your view. To do that, all you need to do is click the view button in the upper right side of your screen and select speaker view, and you will only see the person who is speaking there, which makes it a little bit simpler. The second thing, we want to encourage you to stay until the end of the webinar. That is when we are going to be sharing how you can get a copy of Cynthia's new book, All Are Welcome, and you can nominate either yourself or a teammate for a complimentary coaching engagement through Slate that is valued at just under $5,000. Third, we are going to have an extremely rich discussion today with an author and industry leaders. If you have questions, you are welcome to drop them in the chat. We can't promise that we're going to get to all of them, but our moderator is going to do her absolute best to incorporate them as we go along the way. Fourth and final housekeeping item. As you were joining, you may have seen that we have a poll up. If you would want to take a moment to answer that poll, we would love to just kind of get a feel for where you're at on your DEIB strategy within your current organization. Now, as you are submitting poll responses, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Christy Tong, Slate's Head of Coaching and Offering Design. Christy is phenomenal. She has over 20 years of experience in leadership development. She has a true passion for other cultures. She has unplugged from Silicon Valley and lived in Latin America, Africa, and India. Such a special person. In addition, she holds a master's in organizational development from Stanford and is also the host of Leaders Get Real podcast. Christy, thank you so much for moderating today. I am going to turn it over to you now to introduce our panelists.
All right. It is so fantastic to be with everyone and to see all these faces. I see friends from DocuSign and Twilio and Intuitive and Google and more. So really fun. And by the way, I was just leading a seminar in a culture first community, and somebody said when they were encouraging people, turn your cameras on so we can all really be connected. And somebody commented, you know, showing up to a Zoom meeting with your camera off is kind of like showing up to an in-person meeting with a bag over your head. And I thought, well, I'd never heard it that way. But I really want to encourage you, if you're comfortable, by all means, this is an authentic space where we can connect with one another. So turn your camera on. That'll help our panelists get to connect with you and to have a really rich exchange. And with that, just want to make that connection. At Slate, we are steeped in the efforts to grow leaders and to grow inclusive leaders that create inclusive organizations. And so we're so energized to have this esteemed group as a panel. And in order for them to know and all of us to know about you, let's start there. Let's focus on you. Let's bring up that poll so we can see what kind of world you're living in. So Melissa, if you want to share those results of the poll with all of us. And let's see, can we see that yet? Let us know when we bring that up if you can see it all right. Can you see the data?
Yeah, we can see it, Christy.
Okay, great, excellent. I want to see what's in your view. So what do we have here? It looks like blinders, meaning the company might like to think we're inclusive, but lots of contradictions in the walk and the talk. Only 12% of you are in that scenario. That's great. Believers, they're talking the talk, so that's good, that at least there's some indications there, but you know, the PR statement, some of the outward communications is about as far as you see it. We've got 8% of you, so fewer in that category. Then our biggest category, bought in, talking the talk and beginning to walk the walk. And we'll maybe perhaps have some of that come up today. You've hired now, you've got somebody who maybe not even just in the HR group, but even an exec level who's now got diversity in the title. Or you're taking steps, you've got ERGs forming, you're thinking about it in your hiring practice, some of those early steps. And then the builders, the walk and the talk is happening. Really exciting when an organization is getting to this stage. 35% of you there, with 46% in the bought-in phase. So it looks like that's our big majority, and that is exciting to see those top two categories is what you're living in. And we'll talk a little bit too, as our panelists get going, about some of the challenges that they've observed at each one of those phases. That there's some things in any stage you're in, but this is hard work, right? That we're all doing. So with that, I want to bring to you our panelists. And the first is Cindy Owyoung, someone I was absolutely delighted to discover with her new book that's just come out, All Are Welcome: How to Build a Real Workplace Culture of Inclusion that Delivers Results. In addition to that, I'll let her tell you her current role and where she is.
Hi, everyone. Christy, thank you for the introduction. I am so thrilled to be here. In addition to being the author of this new book, I hold down a role as the VP of Inclusion, Equity, and Belonging at Robinhood. I've been there about a year. Our mission is to democratize finance for all. So you can see how DEIB is built into our purpose. Prior to Robinhood, I've held similar roles at companies as varied as GitHub, to Charles Schwab, to Yahoo, and Intuit, and been a consultant in my past life as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Cindy. And I want to introduce Katie Juran. She is a client of ours that we love partnering with. She has been a trailblazer in her field. Katie, tell us about you.
Thank you, Christy, and thanks, Slate, for organizing this. What a great group and awesome audience here. So I'm Katie Juran. I'm Vice President of Global Inclusion and Diversity at Intuitive. Intuitive is global, based in Silicon Valley, and we're in the minimally invasive care space. So we've been a pioneer in robotic assisted surgery equipment. Many of you or your family members might have benefited from a much less invasive surgery through our products. And it's interesting, it's at that combination of healthcare and tech. So I'm really enjoying it so far. I've been at the company 6 months. Prior to Intuitive, I was at Adobe for 18 years, the last 4 of which I was leading diversity and inclusion there and built up that function.
Excellent. And we have Valerie Jackson as well. So delighted to actually meet you even more recently and get to know you through this panel. Tell us about where you are.
Hi, everyone. My name's Valerie Jackson. I am living and working in Arizona. Shout out to my friend in Surprise. I am the Chief Diversity Officer at Zuora. I love how Katie put it. Your company is at the intersection of health and tech. I'd like to say Zuora is at the intersection of tech and life because we power the subscription economy. And if you are on a Zoom, you're leveraging one of our customers' great benefits. And so it's been an exciting ride. I joined Zuora a year and a half ago from our customer Procore, another cloud software management company that powers the built environment. And prior to that, I was in law. I'm also a finance lawyer, currently in recovery. And I worked at firms that you may or may not have heard of, but I tend to work in globally dispersed environments. Yeah, Stacey, you get me, right? I work in global environments, typically multiple countries, multiple locations, and a few thousand people. And yeah, I've also worked some other places, but I've been focused on people and culture, and specifically D&I, employee experience, for the last 15 years. And then prior to that, I was practicing in another world, another lifetime. And if there are any like auditors, lawyers, consultants, recovering, y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. And we're going to have a rich conversation, and we've got some kind of frequently asked questions and some themes that we are excited to dive in on. And just to kind of frame the conversation, when we think about our work at Slate, and when I think about the work that many of you are doing, especially in DEIB roles, we think about this parallel paths. One is about how do we change the systems? How do we actually do the things that will create culture change and create inclusive organizations? And as you all know, we all know that is an uphill battle of rolling the boulder up the hill. So that's the tireless, work of changing the systems. And then there's a parallel path, and I don't think this is talked about as often, and it's something we've got a lot of passion around, and that is supporting individuals who are in the systems, underrepresented groups and individuals who are in those systems that haven't yet changed, and they still are trying to contribute, have a meaningful work life, and have an impactful one along the way. So we look at how can we grow leaders to change the systems and change those cultures? And then what can we do in our roles to support those who are actually wanting to thrive and have so much to contribute every day? So that both of those may come up, the work that is involved for all of you. And with that, when we think about work for diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, we want to actually give you a chance to hear from our panelists, first and foremost, about the concept that DEIB is good business strategy, not just good HR strategy, or not just something that is the right thing or feels good to do. So I want to start with you, Cindy, and feel free to share any of the real nuggets that come to your mind most from your book. We'll talk later about how, if people haven't yet discovered that, they can all take part. But share some of those nuggets about why should businesses care about DEIB.
Thanks so much for the question, Christy. I think any business leader that cares about positioning their business for future success should care about DEIB, because there's been enough research done over the past couple of decades that shows that companies that have more diverse leadership teams and really truly demonstrate their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are companies that have better financial performance than their peers who don't. They have better decision-making, more innovation, higher creativity. Right? All of these things are about being an effective organization. And if you have an effective organization, you're going to have better business outcomes, right? And I think if we as business leaders don't want to miss the opportunity that is inherent with being able to leverage more diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging inside our organizations, then it is incumbent upon us to really focus in this space and not just like care about it, but do the thing to actually accomplish more diversity and equity in our organizations.
Awesome. Now that you said a stellar list. You said companies with more diversity have better financial performance, right? That's a great first tagline. And then you said about 4 more or 5. Do you mind just saying those again?
Yeah, absolutely. So better financial performance than their peers, higher innovation, higher creativity, and they make better business decisions.
Great. And we can share some of those references as well along the way. But Katie, I think you've also had various things that have helped you make that case.
Yes, really building on what Cindy just covered, I think all of those things are true, right? There's research that shows that all of those dimensions are helped by DEIB. I've found there's certain angles that resonate the most with the companies where I've worked. And really they fall into 2 areas. One is the power of belonging, meaning how employees feel in their day-to-day experience, actually translating into hard data metrics that all managers and leaders care about, right? So retention, performance, less sick time, greater productivity. I mean, all those things have been directly tied to belonging, which can actually feel like a very squishy quality, I think, to some leaders. So I love to cite some of those statistics because I think it feels highly relevant, and especially now with the talent market we're in, and it's so hard to hire and it's so painful to lose somebody, right? Like you need every tool in your toolkit to keep those folks. So it makes for a really strong argument. And then the other one, I often talk about this study, and it was quite a while ago that it was done, but it was a study of decision making or accurate problem solving, if you will, done in a college context. And why I love talking about it is it didn't get into race or gender or, some of these topics that people can trip up on. It was just like group and unlike group. So fraternity and sorority members, and were the fellow participants in this study from their own group or were they not, and they studied the decision-making and problem-solving dynamics of these groups. And what they found is that diverse groups, meaning where someone was added from outside of the insulated identity group, they had a much higher rate of solving the problem accurately than if it was just within a group. But, and here's the but, and I love telling this part, the people polled within group perceived their outcome as being better if it was within like group. So it's that sense that you can't trust your own judgment of whether diversity is actually driving better outcomes in your team necessarily, because human nature and our, wiring that we've all, read about is to see like and comfortable as better. So it's just a fun study to cite and a data point to bring up that you can't necessarily trust your instincts on this. You have to look at differences as being maybe uncomfortable, but driving better outcomes. So that's sort of on the diversity side of the equation. Mm-hmm. And again, it breaks through a lot of the other, us versus them kind of dynamics that can happen in this space, which is one of the reasons I like it so much.
Great. I love it. There's such, with your book, Cindy, coming out, with others that have documented, there are so many, great cases and great studies that really make it tangible. And I love, having been in the field for decades in, leadership, talent development, and so on, seeing the industries go from satisfaction surveys to engagement surveys having such legitimacy. And for you, Katie, to tie belonging certainly, belonging is about engagement, and so on. And so I love seeing the titles these days for diversity leaders. Sometimes it's got engagement in it. Sometimes it's got culture in it. Sometimes it's got, of course, the standard ones that we will talk about here about equity and so on. But all the ways that we can tie it to these tangible business results, from everything from sick time and retention all the way to financial performance. So lots of good stuff out there. We won't take more time on that, but we know we've got believers here, preaching to the choir, so to speak. But the more we can share with one another some great things that remind people of that compelling case or open eyes to that compelling case. And what we want to do from here, though, is dive in and not only recognize, yes, there's a strong case that can be made, regardless of the reasons why this is important. There is a strong case for it. Let's dive into a second theme that we want to really dig in on, which is about DEIB strategy. And Cindy, such a core foundation of your book is that we have to integrate our DEIB efforts into everything we do. It's not in one small compartment. And so do you want to share with us the 4 Ps and some of the framing?
Yeah, so I actually didn't start my career in DEIB. I started my career in marketing. And so if any of you are familiar with the marketing space, you're familiar with the 4 Ps of marketing, right? Price, promotion, place, and I forget the last one, product. So, I think that, I take that into a lot of the work that I do from a DEIB perspective today. And I think it's important to think of the 4 Ps in a different frame for DEIB, which is people, place, product, and planet. And how, talent in and of itself, which is the people bucket there, isn't in isolation. Right? Like we're part of a bigger context within our organizations, within our societies. And, we need to support diversity from that talent perspective with this broader ecosystem and acknowledging that, right? And so, you have to not just be able to focus on your people, but you also want to focus on the inclusive environment you're creating, both physically and intangibly, right? From a place perspective, right? So that's the place piece. You've got to look at it from your product perspective and the marketplace that you're serving. Like, who are your customers? How are you developing product? What does your marketing outreach look like, and to whom? And then, how are we operating within the communities that we serve, right? We're part of a larger context in society and the planet, right? And so there's legislation that affects how we do business and how DEIB is treated within our companies. The communities in which we operate, if we're working with nonprofits and other non-governmental organizations to support marginalized communities and their access to like our products and services, those things will all form this virtuous cycle between these 4 key areas that then reinforce each other, right? Because if we're doing great in the community, hopefully we're creating customers and talent for our future, right? And if we are really adamant about better serving that marketplace of customers, then we are going to create and develop product that serves those customers, and we need the talent to do that, right? So it's all very interconnected, and why I think it's important to really integrate the DEIB strategy across all of these pillars.
Outstanding framing for discussion. And we're going to touch briefly on these different 4, but especially dig in deep on the people side and some ways that there can be such impact, whether or not, many people in here may not be in charge of product or be able to pull some of those levers. But let's start with that. And Valerie, I know that you've got some great things to touch on in terms of your organization and how your company sees your product through a DEIB lens.
We're working on it. We certainly are working on it. That's the goal. So our North Star in diversity and inclusion is to create really a company, a culture, and set of experiences that everyone in our ecosystem, 360 degrees, wants to subscribe to. Whether you are a customer, a partner, an employee, right? Our customers' customers, AKA subscriber. We want everyone to have a fantastic experience. And that, when it comes to products, whether your product is a thing or it's a service, how you feel when you receive that product or service really dictates whether you keep coming back, right? That and your level of need for it. But sometimes even if you really need it, if you don't like how you feel when you get it, you're not going to come back, at least not to us. So what we're working on both on the back end and the front end is to decipher how can we make our products and experiences better for all, from the initial touch point all the way through, whether it is through global services and implementation, or on the sales side, on the building side. And it is a really complex and layered endeavor with lots of different teams, looking at everything from our coding language to how we interact on the teams that are building and testing, to how we interact and set examples for our sales teams when they interact with customers and partners, to how we actually structure the interfaces. So it is a long effort, and I'm thrilled that my chief product engineering officer was like on board before I ever brought it up. He's extraordinarily passionate about it from a product perspective, also passionate about it from a people perspective, because without the people, you had no product, right? And
Awesome.
I think that whether you are a multi-product company or a single product company, or your product is a service, there are ways to improve it using an inclusive lens, whether you leverage inclusive design as you think about how you build the product, or you leverage inclusive behavior principles when you are engaging with people. I look at inclusion as really an optimization function, right? The D&I org, we don't sit in HR. We actually are a separate business unit that reports, that's part of the office of the CEO. And we're like an octopus, we're in everything. And so the goal is to optimize the experience for those of us in it, and for those folks and entities that will experience it. Because why else are we doing it?
Right. I love it. Why else? So that gives a great framing. And if there's time, we're going to get to a topic around partnering across and within your organization. And you just made the allusion of, that partnership with your head of product. And so perhaps we'll get to circle back to that in thinking, what are all the different ways you can partner so that you are addressing this at every level in your organization? So thanks, Valerie. Cindy, why don't you just say a word about two other P's before we dive in deeper on the fourth, the people P. But I know some of your own family history perhaps might drive some of the passion that you have around the P on place and some of the physical things in an environment. And then maybe just say a brief word about planet, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad that you circled back to this, because I think this might answer one of the questions that I see in the chat, right? So from a place perspective, I think, for accessibility issues are a big concern for me, right? Because I think, very often you find that places that meet sort of the minimum level of legislation, and this relates to the planet piece, right? Like we have the American Disabilities Act, and we have standards for buildings to be accessible to people with different disabilities. Very often companies that are building those buildings will meet those standards, but they aren't practically accessible. Right. So you might meet the standard, but like, a friend of mine who has cerebral palsy would come visit me in my office. And she would be like, I can't plug my laptop in to the plug that's like in the middle of the conference table. Like I cannot reach it. right? It is not, practically speaking, accessible for me. And you know, she could give you like 10 other stories in the whole, like, roll up to the building and getting into the elevator and coming into the like office and all of the things. And so I think we have to be really mindful about how do we make our spaces like accessible to people, and what signals we're, you know, and messages we're giving when it's not. Right. And, you know, and I think one of the questions that was in the chat was, you know, from a virtual perspective, how do you make things more accessible to people with disabilities as well? And one of the things that I love about just even this session that we've been thoughtful about, and thank you to Valerie for making the suggestion earlier, is that we have closed captioning, like live closed captioning for this Zoom. And, you know, folks can go into one of the options to show the subtitles to get that closed captioning, which, you know, if you think about medical appointments that are virtual now since the pandemic, like anyone should, you know, if we're using Zoom, we at least have that option now. And there are many other kind of video conferencing tools that have things like that as well. And those are really good examples of how you can create more inclusion, right? In both your place and then from a planet perspective, right? Those of us who advocate and legislate, advocate for legislation that supports people from different backgrounds in being their authentic selves at work, and, you know, being able to access opportunities and places in different ways, I think are other things that we have to think about as being really important to address in this space.
Mm-hmm. That's great to touch on those. And let's get to the fourth P, because there's a lot of meaty stuff that we anticipated perhaps diving in on that. And one of those that can be an early aspect around the people side is looking at underrepresented groups. And so we're going to do a quick poll so that when we talk about ERGs, one way of supporting URGs, underrepresented groups, there's a poll up, and go ahead and take just a moment. And with that, you'll be able to respond about your own organization. We want to keep it real and keep a good pulse on what is true for your organization. And that'll help decide how much time to spend talking about some of these things. And we'll give you another little bit to see the range from hasn't established ERGs, perhaps hasn't even been thinking about it, to, well, didn't do ERGs, but there's actually some intentionality to do some other things that support URGs. Some that might have been initiated since 2020, AKA George Floyd's murder, and others that might have been well established for many years. So let's see if, Melissa, you tell us when it looks like a good time to end the poll. All right. So, wow, we've got over half the group has had long established ERGs. That's great to see that that's been in place. Almost 20% that did initiate since 2020, 10% that might be doing some other things. Perhaps we'll get somebody who responded that way. Perhaps you can even put that in the chat, is mention a headline of what some things as perhaps alternative to ERG, and 19% that haven't established them. So with that, Cindy, you've got a feel, or all of you have a feel now for who's, you know, got what going on. Cindy, do you want to say a few words? You mentioned some really good stuff in your book. We'll save some things about leadership for the next topic, but some headlines when you think about ERGs and some of the research that can give some good advice.
Yeah, you know, I think that very often ERGs are looked at in one of two ways, right? One, it's sort of just these social groups that people need communities of support around, which, you know, I think is absolutely part of the main function of ERGs, but is also can be limiting if we only think of them that way. right? I think that it's important to think about ERGs not just as communities of support, but also leadership development opportunities and business resources that can contribute to product development, customer experience, right? Accessibility feedback, right? You know, many of us have ERGs that are not just race or gender based, but you know, are built around other characteristics and dimensions of diversity like parenthood or LGBTQ orientation or disability and military status, right? So we can have many different kinds of ERGs that can contribute that perspective to all aspects of those 4 Ps of our businesses, and I think can really be leveraged in that way. And that sort of brings me to the second approach, which is I actually think ERGs are very under leveraged from that perspective of being a business resource to companies. So I think that companies that can really do an effective job of seeing their ERGs as talent pools and feedback mechanisms for different aspects of their business are the ones that are going to really, exceed expectations in making progress in DEIB.
I love that. And just keeping with that spirit about an inclusive culture that delivers results. Recently, that sparked the thought. So we actually have some coaching. Our coaches are coaching some folks in a veterans ERG. And what came up from one of the ones leading that ERG, he said he imagines that 1 in 4 people in their company have had some kind of military experience or someone in their family, if you take all branches, Coast Guard, et cetera. And like 1 in 4. And we said, wow, if you were to actually export, like share some of the things that your ERG group is doing within your company, I was like, you guys could be like a go-to for companies across the nation on how to actually help people make that transition well and thrive in the corporate environment. And he went, oh my gosh, he's like, we got to share that back with the company. They're going to love that. That could be so good for recruiting. And he was like, we could attract all kinds of talent and so on. So just seeing that cycle, which is wonderful that you bring that out in addition to being a great place of refuge or support, that it can have all kinds of benefits for the business as well. Now let's turn to Katie. I know that you have recognized, just the important role that ERG's leader play. I'm back at Adobe, and now when you've just arrived at Intuitive, that's where we actually formed some partnership. So tell us about kind of that realization for you of what you wanted to do for your leaders to support them.
Yes, thanks, Christy. I agree with everything that Cindy just said about the strategic nature of ERGs, but I think in many corporate environments, it's hard. It's a hard balance. They have their day job, right? It is a volunteer-driven, typically type of model, and so I think a lot of ERG members, and especially ERG leaders who are typically giving more of their time and energy to the effort, feel torn, like, okay, the time I'm spending on ERG is time I'm not spending on my day job. Does that maybe hamper my advancement or my positioning with my, manager or leader? And that's it's a terrible position for a DEIB team to be in, to feel like you're somehow taking away from their career success, when in reality, it should be just the opposite. So as a way to recognize our ERG leaders, we actually partnered with Slate. We already had a arrangement with the company, but we funded out of our IND budget a tailored coaching program for all of our ERG leaders across we have 7 ERGs. And it was done as a thank you, first of all, for the time and energy that they're putting in, but also as an investment in their career. So, we're very intentional in not saying this is not coaching so you can be a better leader of X ERG. This is coaching so you can do whatever you want to do in your career journey and feel like you're working on that and getting our support in that. So the hope is that, with that, they feel like that direct investment in them is paying off, and that the extra work and energy they put into being an ERG leader is reaping some gains for them career-wise. And that's not the only thing, of course. We try to communicate directly with their managers about the impact and provide help with goal setting and performance reviews and in any other way that we can support them. But it's just a very meaningful, like, direct investment. And we're so fortunate to have Slate as a scalable partner who could take that on. So very positive response. We just launched it in January, so I don't have stats as far as kind of impact yet, but anecdotally, it's been very appreciated, and I have a lot of confidence that it will have a meaningful impact on those folks' careers very directly.
All right, that's a great way, lead in, and we'll talk about ERGs in the next space. A huge aspect around really incorporating this into everything in your organization is the leadership topic. And so, Melissa, if you want to pop up another poll here, and our work is at really, as experts in the leadership space, is we want to see every organization really position inclusive leadership as an absolute core leadership competency. And so rather than it's a side thing that you do diversity training over here, no. If you're going to look at excelling leaders, they would be a strategic leader, a balanced leader, an inclusive leader, and so on. So take a moment and respond there about how your organization is viewing inclusive leadership and whether it's positioning it as it can strategically as a core competency that people get measured by, promoted by, and so on, so that there is strong incentive to grow your capabilities in that area. So with that, we'll take a look. We've had some responses, and Melissa, let me know if you want to, okay, in that poll. So we've got, oh, cool. We've got 41% saying absolutely. It's an important measure in performance. That's exciting to see the majority there. Some sort of, maybe you don't even have competencies in some of your startups and still getting some of those things established, but 29% say sort of. And then 29, an equal amount, not really. People may agree with it, but there isn't any proactive steps to actually incorporate that into your infrastructure. And then none that say not a thought here. So that's helpful. Let's hear just a word from any of you. Perhaps Valerie, I know that you're very passionate about leadership, want to speak to this, but when it comes to this arena, ERGs is, of course, a training grounds where you can actually focus leadership development on those individuals. But there are some other aspects as well as you think about leadership from a DEIB filter. Any thoughts, Valerie?
So I got a lot of thoughts. Let me put in my other headphones so I don't scream. Leaders are essential. However you define leadership in your organization, it could be anyone with a single direct report, or it could be someone with a certain title or a level of experience. I don't care. Whoever is a leader in your organization, they are embodiments of your culture. And if our cultures are not healthy or not conducive to growth, innovation, engagement, great products, whatever it is you're seeking to do, then we're not going to flourish as a company. And there are studies that actually demonstrate and measure the impact of inclusive leaders on their teams. And there's also how it just feels good, right? But I do love data. So let me start with the data point. So Deloitte, I love all the consultancies because they have a lot of free resources. Y'all check them out. So Deloitte did a study across, I think, 6 different countries, different cultures and different primary languages, but studied professionals in the business space and found that inclusive leaders, according to their definition of what inclusive is, can increase team members' feelings of inclusion, your perception of feeling fairly treated, feeling like you're respected, like you're valued, like you belong, by up to 70%. Okay. inclusive leaders can impact or increase team members' feelings of inclusion by up to 70%. And then that also can increase team performance by 17% and collaboration by almost 30%. Okay, so inclusive leaders are like an unlock for a team. They are stewards for a culture. But even if you don't like data, if you think about a time when you interacted with someone who had power or influence and who treated you inclusively, do you remember how that felt? Do you remember whether you felt incentivized to work with them, to listen to them, to help further whatever they're recruiting you for or building with you? It feels good. And how we feel dictates how we work, because we are not machines. Not yet. We are humans.
Awesome. That's beautifully said. I love it, both the mind, and the heart. The data says it, so do the stories and our own experience. And you just reminding us, what was it like when you were led by a capable and inclusive leader? What kind of inspiration and impact did that have? And well said, Valerie, coming from you, who comes from a stock of capable, inclusive leaders. I loved learning that your dad was the first Black mayor of a Southern city, and your mom, the first female to get her MBA at Wharton. And certainly they've been trailblazers, as are you. So love hearing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My mom was one of the first Black women to get an MBA from Wharton. She benefited from other women who helped blaze the trail. And my dad was smart enough to marry
her. Sounds great. Okay, so I knew I was gonna hate watching the clock and hate seeing that there's so much good things to cover. Other topics on leadership front are certainly around hypos. That's such an important area for those of you, head of talent. Maybe just one word, Cindy, perhaps, around kind of the red flag in organizations when you have hypo. You choose who gets the coaching or who gets the leadership development or the opportunities. Is the high potentials when that can be a code word, for people choosing people like themselves without being aware of bias.
Yeah, it is really about watching out for that red flag of you're going to the same go-to people like all the time, and not giving opportunity or access, right, to anyone who might not fall into kind of the norm of what leadership is currently defined as, right, which we all know is made up by the majority straight, white, male, able-bodied, right, all of those dimensions of diversity that are overrepresented compared to usually like the rest of the population within organizations. And so we really have to look at how we're defining high potential and leadership material, and look at what is our process, right, for defining the people, identifying the people who would fall into that definition. Those are the things that we have to design mitigation practices around in how we do succession planning and how we distribute work and how we do promotions and advance people and who gets chosen for leadership development opportunities, which I think, Katie had spoken so eloquently to earlier as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, there's so many topics, so we might have to do a to be continued, a regroup or something, but other things that we might have touched on with more time. One is some of the challenges that you might face depending on that first survey of which phase you're in, whether you're in a blinders, believers, bought in, or builders category. And I give a shout out to Dolly Chug, the author of the book called The Person You Mean to Be, How Good People Fight Bias. And some of that language around, are you a believer in this, or are you a builder, came from her. So that's another great resource if you haven't discovered her research She's an MBA academic professor with a lot of sociology research about these topics of bias. So we were going to talk about challenges, but what the panelists said when we got together yesterday is, which one's the hardest? Anyone? Any of our panelists?
They're all hard.
Exactly. So just because you're in a builders category doesn't like, oh, whew, it's easy. We got easy work here. They all agreed. They've been in organizations in each of those different levels, and they're all hard. They're all hard. The work we're doing is hard work. So we just want to say kudos to all of you on that before we wrap some things together to say we realize the hard work that you're doing. The last thing, and I'm gonna ask for just like a 30-second sound bite from each of our panelists, because we talked about the headline of this is getting results, an inclusive culture that gets results. So if well, Katie, what's one of your favorite quotes? Just share that
Yes, quote. My favorite quote, I've kind of lived my life by this since high school. It's a quote from Will Rogers, who was a humorist in the early 20th century. And it's, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. And the spirit of that, which I try to live, is it doesn't matter if things seem good, they can always be better, right? You've always got to be moving forward from wherever you are and doing something. And it might not be everything and it might not be perfect, but do something. And I've done that personally. I do that professionally. And I think it's very relevant to this space because it can be overwhelming. You can feel like there's so many problems and these things are going to take years and, you know, why should I even try? But it's amazing what you can do just tackling something, even a small thing, making one change can make a big difference. So I think that's my inspiration.
Now let's, what we want to do, we want to make sure that you know how you can have an opportunity for a copy of Cindy's book, a signed copy perhaps even, and also how you can have some other advantages and get some more resources that we've been alluding to. What we're going to do is we're going to have Melissa wrap that bow right now before you have to go, and we'll save the soundbite from each of our panelists till the last moment, which is they each said if they could only give advice of one thing, in the spirit of Katie's quote, do something. If you feel like there's barriers and senior leaders aren't bought in, you can only do one thing. They've each got a piece of advice for you they'd love to share. But with that, Melissa, tell us some practical stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christy. As we are wrapping up, I want to be sure that I let you all know that you are going to be receiving a post-webinar survey this afternoon. We hope that you will take a moment just to share your feedback with us. And in doing so, there are going to be two unique opportunities that you're going to want to pay attention to. First, if you were intrigued with the conversation today and you are curious about how Slate could enhance the DEIB work that you are doing in-house, we would love to chat with you. We're especially focused on scalable leadership coaching programs to elevate underrepresented groups and build a culture of inclusive leadership. One of the questions on that survey is going to be, would you like to schedule a conversation with Slate? If you answer yes, and we book a time to chat, Slate is going to gift you a copy of Cynthia's new book, All Are Welcome. I think that all of us who have read it were so impressed and cannot recommend it enough. The second thing that I want to call out on the survey is a question asking if you would like to nominate either yourself or someone on your team for an Ignite coaching engagement through Slate. This engagement has a value of just under $5,000, and it is focused on creating breakthrough growth in a specific focus area. The post-webinar email that you will receive from us is going to include more details on the actual offering so that you can get a feel for what it includes and who you might want to nominate. And as a fun side note, when Katie mentioned earlier that Intuitive offers coaching to ERG leaders, this is actually the program that they're using. So in closing, we hope that each of you are walking away with an action that you can put into play in your own organizations. I am going to turn it back over to Christy so that we can get some quick tangible actions from our panelists. And I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Yes. All right. So for each of you, let's see. Let's start with Katie. What's the one thing?
Okay, the one thing to start, working with a leadership team to develop a clear vision and mission and high-level strategic framing. Even if a lot of the stuff underneath that framing doesn't exist yet, having that North Star that you can continue to rally people toward, to me, is the starting point for everything.
Wonderful. All right. And you alluded to it earlier that you're a fan of data. Valerie, what's a nugget about what you'd recommend?
Know your data. Actually, I would preface that with know your why, all of your whys, your personal why for doing this work, your company's why for doing this work, and your stakeholders' why for doing any sort of change. Wonderful. When we know those things and we know our data, then we can be sure more often than not that we are headed in the right direction. Good luck. We love you. You got this.
Wonderful. And Cindy.
I love what Valerie said. I would say after you do all of those things with Katie and Valerie, right? Ask for help. Involve your employees, get their feedback, learn what their experiences are at the company, and leverage them, right? You don't have to do it alone. You can get help from your broader employee base and leaders, because there are going to be lots of them who care just as much as you do about driving change in this space. So use it.
Wonderful. And that's such a great one to end on, that we can't do it alone. And so that whole idea of integrating this into everything you do includes involving people at every level. I know Katie has had experience at Adobe with action circles, where they would actually bring people together to discuss allyship and then go back into their different business units to have an impact. There have also been coffee breaks and so on. So each of our panelists have such a wealth of experience, things they've tried, experimented, things they've failed with, things that have been incredibly successful. So they did say that they invite you to reach out to them on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to any of them. That was a warm welcome. That they said if you've got questions that we didn't get to pursue, or there was a reference that sparked your interest, they would love to keep that conversation going, as would we. So thank you so much for being here. And perhaps we'll end with Cindy, a quote, as our Netflix colleague, Vernay, has a classic quote that many know that talks about diversity and inclusion, but you've actually gone beyond that. Do you want to just close with that quote that encompasses diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging?
Yeah, so Vernay Myers has this wonderful TED Talk. I encourage everyone to watch it, where she uses the analogy for diversity and inclusion. As diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. I think, an extension of that is, in terms of equity, is providing dance lessons for those who need it, and belonging is knowing all the songs.
Fantastic. All right, we cannot thank you panelists enough. You're extraordinary women, and we chose a female crew during International Women's Month. So wonderful to see the extraordinary things that you're accomplishing in your own organizations, and your generosity of wanting to share that wisdom and that leverage with all of those who came today. So we look forward to continuing with all of you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Slate, for having us.
Thank you so much.
This was great.